On November 2, 2016, in the quiet town of Redding, California, Sherry Papini left her home for a morning jog and then vanished without a trace. Her phone and earphones were left behind near a deserted intersection, marking the beginning of a desperate search that yielded no answers. 4 years later, when her husband learned the reason for her disappearance, he was so shocked he could hardly bear it. So what really happened? Before we begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. It really means a lot to know that you're with us. We're going through this together. Now let me tell you what really happened. 4 years had passed, but Keith still couldn't erase the image of that morning. Every time he closed his eyes, it came back vividly, like an old wound that never stopped bleeding. November 2nd, 2016, began like any other ordinary day. Keith remembered hearing Sherry wake up early, bustling around in the kitchen with the kids. The smell of fresh coffee filled the house, the sound of chopping echoed lightly, and their son's giggles rang out from some clumsy joke Sherry made. She always had a way of making the kids laugh, sometimes with just a mischievous wink. "Sleep a little more, honey. I'll take care of the kids and wake you up soon," Sherry called from the kitchen. Keith mumbled something, turned over, but peeked through the hallway to catch a glimpse of Sherry, hair tied up, wearing her familiar light blue sweater. About an hour later, he heard the door close softly, and Sherry's car rolled out of the garage. Keith dozed off for another 10 minutes before getting up to make himself a cup of coffee. He turned on the TV and listened to the weather report. Clear skies, mild sunshine, the perfect temperature for a morning jog, not too cold. He texted Sherry, "Don't forget to pick up the kids on time." The message showed as sent, but never read. The entire afternoon, Keith was busy at work. Around 4:45 p.m., he finally left the office and drove home. On the way, he thought about dinner. Sherry had said she'd roast chicken and make the potato salad the kids loved so much. By the time Keith pulled into the driveway, the afternoon shadows were long. Sherry's SUV was parked right where it had been that morning. Keith's heart skipped a beat. He called out as he walked through the door, "Sherry? I'm home?" No answer. The house was unusually quiet. The dining table was tidy. He walked around the kitchen, checked the oven. No smell of food. The living room was empty. He called Sherry's phone, but it just rang and went to voicemail. Keith set the phone on the table, his hands trembling slightly. He tried again, this time texting, "Where are you? Are you okay?" No reply. A tightening sensation began to rise in his chest. The kids should have been picked up from daycare. Sherry never left them there past pickup time. He called the daycare. The teacher's voice came through the line. "Mr. Papini, the kids are still here waiting for their mom. She hasn't come yet." Keith felt the blood freeze in his veins. He opened Find My iPhone, his heart pounding as a green dot appeared, Sherry's location, near the intersection of Sunrise Drive. That's the road she usually jogs through. Could she still be out running? But why isn't she answering her phone? Without thinking further, Keith grabbed his keys and bolted out the door. When he arrived at Sunrise Drive, the street was deserted. The sky was darkening, and a cold breeze rustled the roadside grass. Keith scanned the area and called out, "Sherry!" No response, only the distant rush of a passing truck. Then he saw it, Sherry's phone lying in the grass, tangled earphones partly covered in dirt. He picked it up, hands shaking. The screen was slightly cracked, the signal weak but still on. Keith screamed her name, his voice breaking. "Sherry, where are you?" No reply. Insects began to chirp in the creeping darkness. Keith stood frozen, clutching the phone, an overwhelming sense of helplessness swallowing him whole. A long night began, dragging with it a fear unlike anything he had ever known, when Keith realized nothing from this moment would ever be normal again. At that moment, Keith couldn't have imagined the search would last for years, and the darkness before him was only the beginning of a terrifying mystery. The gray sky cast heavy shadows over the forest. 4 years had passed since that trembling afternoon when Keith held Sherry's phone by the roadside, but the images that followed remained vivid. The sound of police sirens approaching, boots trampling the wet grass, the crackle of radios, and the hurried voices of patrol officers. "We'll cordon off this area first. The search teams will spread out in 2 directions," one officer told Keith firmly. Flashlights swept across the grass. A dog barked loudly in the distance. Keith followed 2 officers closely, his eyes scanning every tree branch and patch of brush. "Mr. Papini, please step back and let us work," said a young officer, placing a hand gently on Keith's shoulder. But Keith brushed him off. "No, I need to come. I know where Sherry usually runs, where she tends to stop." A group of volunteers arrived, most of them familiar faces from town. Liz, the neighbor who used to babysit Sherry's kids, came running, breathless. "Keith, I heard the news. Oh God, we have to find her." Keith gripped Liz's hand tightly. "Thank you. Let's split up and walk along this trail. If anyone sees anything strange, notify the police immediately." A voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. "Northern team found nothing. Expanding search perimeter." A strong wind rustled the branches above, making them clack together. A fine drizzle began to fall. Keith crouched low, flashlight sweeping the ground, hoping to find Sherry's footprints. Dozens of police vehicles were lined up along Sunrise Drive. Their flashing lights formed a jagged ribbon of color through the misty rain. Further down the road, a group of firefighters huddled around a topographic map spread out on a car hood. "Keith, over here," someone called. He ran toward them. They pointed at the map. "We're going to focus on the western forest, rough terrain, rocky outcrops. Are you sure Sherry used to run near there?" Keith swallowed hard. "She usually stuck to the trail, not too deep, but maybe today she tried a different route. I don't know." Another officer chimed in. "That's possible, but we're not ruling anything out. Teams, move out." Groups dispersed into the woods, flashlights flickering in the darkness. Calls of Sherry rang out, mingled with the soft patter of rain. Farther away, a television crew set up. A reporter in a raincoat held a microphone. "We're here at the scene where police have launched a large-scale search. Sherry Papini, 34, went missing during a morning jog today. Her husband, Keith Papini, alerted police after discovering her phone near Sunrise Drive." Keith glanced at them without a word. He turned back to the trail and continued calling Sherry's name into the void. The rain grew heavier. A search dog pulled on its leash, barking at a bush, but it turned out to be just the scent of a skunk. A lieutenant approached Keith, speaking softly. "We need to ask you a few questions, Keith, about your recent relationship with Sherry." Keith turned abruptly. "What? You're asking me that now?" "This is standard procedure, Keith. We need all the information." Keith trembled, eyes blazing. "My wife is missing out there. You should be out finding her, not interrogating me." But the lieutenant remained calm. "We're working all angles simultaneously. If you truly want to help, you'll need to answer honestly." Keith gasped for breath, his fists clenched white, but finally he spoke. "We were fine. Some minor disagreements, but who doesn't have those?" Flashlights continued to sweep across the woods. Shadowy figures moved silently along the trail. A voice came over the radio, distorted by static. "No signs yet. Continue expanding the search area." Darkness deepened. The rain didn't stop. A long night fell over the cold, wet treetops. A question echoed in Keith's mind, and in the minds of everyone searching. Where is Sherry, and why did she vanish without a trace? And so 4 years passed, until one day a familiar figure appeared in a distant place, and behind the morning mist, thousands of secrets began to surface. On a late October morning in 2020, along Interstate 5, the sky was still veiled in mist. Heavy trucks rumbled past under the yellow glow of their headlights. The roadside grass was soaked from the previous night's rain, silent as always. But that morning, a figure stumbled out of the brush, clothes torn, barefoot on the freezing asphalt, eyes wild with fear as they looked toward the roaring traffic before collapsing onto the cold ground. A truck driver spotted the strange object and quickly pulled over. "Who the hell dumped something in the road like this?" he muttered, annoyed, as he got out to check. It wasn't an object. It was a thin, battered woman covered in wounds. Startled, he recoiled, then cautiously reached down to feel for breath. "Still alive," he said, quickly dialing 911. The flashing lights of the ambulance reflected off the emergency room windows. Sherry Papini lay motionless on the gurney, emaciated, hair matted with sweat and dried blood. A nurse held the oxygen mask over her face while scanning her vitals. "She's severely dehydrated, blood pressure's crashing. We need fluids now," the nurse said urgently. "Bruising around wrists and ankles. Signs of prolonged restraint," the attending doctor noted. "Small burns on the back, possibly from hot metal, and these scars look like blunt force trauma." The truck driver, the first to find Sherry, stood in the hallway, still visibly shaken. She came out of the brush, arms raised like she was begging for help. "I barely stopped in time. Called 911 the moment I saw her." In the emergency room, Keith burst in like a man unhinged. "Sherry? Sherry!" The nurse held him back. "Sir, please, she's receiving treatment. You need to stay calm." Keith struggled briefly, but his eyes softened as he saw his wife's face, swollen, pale, her eyes unfocused. "Sherry, it's me, Keith." She could only whisper, lips dry and barely moving. A voice came from the doorway. "Keith Papini?" A plainclothes detective entered with two others. "I'm Detective Rios. We need to speak with you, right now." Keith turned from his wife, confused and angry. "She just got found. She's barely alive. And you want to question me?" "It's protocol," Rios replied calmly. "And currently, your wife is the only witness in what may be a kidnapping case." An hour later, Sherry was moved to the recovery room. Under soft lighting, she seemed more lucid. Two investigators entered with a recorder. A young female officer gave her a gentle smile. "Mrs. Papini, we know you've been through something horrible, but if you feel up to it, please tell us what happened." Sherry glanced at Keith, then turned to the officers. She swallowed hard. "They were women. Two of them." "Who?" Rios asked. "They grabbed me while I was jogging. One had black hair, the other had a tattoo on her neck. I couldn't see clearly." "How did they grab you?" the female officer asked. "Did you see a car? Anyone else?" Sherry shook her head. "They came from behind, pushed me down, put a bag over my head." "Were you taken somewhere? Do you remember any smells, sounds?" "Just Mexican music, always playing, and bleach, strong bleach smell." "Where were you held?" Sherry clenched her fists. "A small room, no windows. I was tied up. They beat me. Asked me strange questions." "What kind of questions?" "Did you cheat on your husband? Who hired you to spy? I didn't understand anything." Keith stepped closer, sitting by her bed. "Did they say why they took you?" Sherry turned to him, eyes filled with tears. "No, I swear I don't know." Out in the hallway, the media had arrived, camera lenses aimed at the hospital room door whenever it creaked open. A CNN reporter shouted, "Has she confirmed it was a kidnapping?" The officer on duty shook his head. "No official statement yet, awaiting forensic results." The next day, Detective Rios stood in front of the investigation board in his office. A photo of Sherry was pinned up with a note. "Claims abduction by two women. No clear description. No signs of sexual assault. Numerous injuries, but none life-threatening." "Keith says she was starved, lost 20 pounds, a fellow officer said, "but the doctor noted her body mass is still within normal range." And she won't speak to us directly, only with Keith present. Rios frowned. Something doesn't add up. Could be PTSD, post-traumatic stress, the officer offered. She's just been through a lot. That night, Keith sat alone in the living room watching a news report on TV. And after 4 years of mysterious disappearance, Sherry Papini has returned in a weakened state, showing signs of physical abuse. The reporter continued. Public questions are mounting. Why did the captors release her? And why can't she clearly describe who they were or where they took her? Keith held his glass tightly, staring at his wife's image on screen. Wild eyes, tangled hair. But something still felt off. He whispered, "What did they do to you, Sherry?" That question lingered in his mind long after night had fallen, as the wind outside the window carried with it a vague unease, like the truth had yet to be spoken. Early in the afternoon, Detective Rios and Lieutenant Delgado returned to the hospital room where Sherry Papini lay still, eyes closed, her hands trembling slightly beneath the thin blanket. Nurse Adams sighed quietly as she saw them enter, her voice low with concern. "She's still very weak." Rios nodded reassuringly, then stepped up to the bedside. "Sherry, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need to ask a few more questions to move forward with the investigation. Do you think you can manage?" Sherry opened her eyes slightly, her voice faint. I'll try." Delgado closed the folder in his hands and set it down in front of her. "In your initial statement, you said there were 2 women, one wearing black, the other blue, both masked. But last night you said they were wearing red and that one of them had sunglasses. Can you tell us the correct color of their clothing?" Sherry furrowed her brow, rubbing her temple. I only saw their figures in the dark. The colors might have looked different because of the headlights. I could have been mistaken." Rios exhaled quietly and flipped through the report. "You also said they kept you in a cement room, no windows. But the rescue team and nearby surveillance show no such structure, only an abandoned warehouse. Are you sure you're not mixing it up?" Sherry brought a trembling hand to her forehead, voice breaking. I don't remember clearly. Just cold walls, a hard floor, complete darkness. I don't know where it was." Rios turned another page of notes. "We also examined your clothing and the restraints. No fingerprints or hairs from anyone else. Sherry, are you absolutely sure you're not hiding something from us?" Sherry broke into tears, shaking her head repeatedly. "No, I swear, I don't know anything." Suddenly, Delgado's phone vibrated. He signaled to Rios and quickly stepped into the hallway. His tense voice filtered through the door crack. "What? Male DNA on the victim's clothing? Doesn't match her husband? Understood. Proceed. Run a genetic genealogy test. Search the public database." When he returned, Delgado looked at Rios, his voice lowered. "They found unidentified male DNA on Sherry's clothes. Doesn't match her husband. The forensics team is going to run a genetic genealogy analysis." Rios frowned. "Genealogical? Can that even work?" Delgado explained. "They're comparing the unknown DNA to public genealogy databases, looking for close familial matches to narrow down potential suspects." Rios nodded. "Get it done. As fast as possible." A few weeks later, Delgado sat in front of his computer screen, the bluish light casting shadows across his weary face. The forensic technician's voice came through the speaker, dry, tense. "We've traced a DNA sample to the Reyes family line. I just sent you the family tree. There are several notable male names, all within the appropriate age range." Delgado nodded, pulling up the chart. A web of names appeared, tangled like a spider's web. He began scanning each one, cross-referencing residence records, criminal history, geographic data, and potential connections. One name gradually emerged from the haze of meaningless data: James Reyes. Delgado straightened in his seat. Wait, this name showed up in Sherry's email log. Rios, standing behind him, leaning on the back of the chair, frowned. Are you sure? Positive, Delgado answered quickly. Emails from a few months ago, mostly about community projects, but their tone seems familiar, and most importantly, he lives just 15 miles from where Sherry was found. Rios's voice dropped. Anything else? Delgado typed a few commands, then leaned back. He left his job exactly when Sherry disappeared. No reason given, no notes in his HR file. Cell phone data places him near Trailhead 3, the same place Sherry's last message came from. Rios met Delgado's eyes, his gaze darkening. That's enough to proceed. Delgado issued the order. Send surveillance, no contact, just trash collection. We need his DNA before we even say a word. 2 days later, on a cold, foggy morning, a plainclothes officer retrieved a garbage bag James had just tossed out behind his house. Inside, a half-empty coffee cup, napkins, food wrappers, all sealed and delivered to the forensics lab. The next morning, Delgado received the call while still inside the precinct elevator. The forensic technician's voice echoed through the line like a hammer strike. Confirmed match. DNA from James Reyes's trash is a perfect match with the sample found on Sherry Papini's clothing. The margin for error is virtually zero. Delgado stepped out of the elevator, voice heavy. Good. Prepare the subpoena. He won't be able to deny this. Rios, emerging from a meeting room, caught Delgado's look. No words were needed. Both men understood. The fog of lies was thinning, and a fragile strand of DNA was now pulling them straight toward the long-hidden accomplice. Less than an hour later, a police motorcycle sped through the narrow streets, heading straight to James Reyes's front door. The door swung open. James, still in a sleek suit from a recent charity gala, froze as he saw the flashing cruiser lights, 2 officers closing in. James Reyes, you're coming with us, Lieutenant Delgado said flatly, his face unreadable. James recoiled slightly, his expression confused. I don't understand what's going on. Interrogation room 3 was as cold and silent as a bunker. James Reyes sat slouched in the metal chair, elbows resting on the icy table. His clothes were wrinkled from the rushed transfer from a small southern Oregon town back to Redding. On the wall, the clock's ticking hands moved slow and deliberate, like a countdown to truth. Rios entered first, followed by Lieutenant Delgado. The door closed behind them with a dry click. Delgado sat down across from Reyes, gently setting a file on the table. James Reyes, residing off the grid in Grants Pass, Oregon. No bank activity, no lease agreements, no social media. You've been off the map for nearly 4 years. Reyes didn't respond. His eyes fell, staring between his fingers. Rios pulled an old newspaper clipping from an envelope and slid it across the table. The headline screamed in red, Sherry Papini missing without a trace. 4-year mystery deepens. Do you know the woman in this photo? Rios asked, voice flat and cold. Reyes swallowed hard and nodded. I know her. That's Sherry. She used to be my girlfriend. Before all of this. Delgado turned to the next set of documents. Maps, genetic data, DNA reports. You were identified through a DNA sample. That sample was found on Sherry's clothing when she reappeared 3 weeks ago, walking dazed into a gas station in Chico, covered in old wounds and telling an incoherent story. Can you explain how your DNA ended up there? Reyes gave a twisted smile, half shame, half resignation. Because I was living with her, in a cabin, in the woods. No Wi-Fi, no phones, no one around. She wasn't kidnapped. She ran away. Rios leaned forward, his eyes hard as steel. You're saying Sherry Papini willingly disappeared for 4 years? For what purpose? Reyes's voice grew weary, like a confession meant more for himself than for law enforcement. She told me. She felt suffocated. Marriage, kids, everyone's expectations. She wanted to vanish completely. She said she only trusted me, that I was the only one who wouldn't judge her. Delgado leaned closer, tapping his fingers on the tabletop. And you helped her stage a kidnapping? Cut her hair? Inflict injuries? Sparking a nationwide manhunt? While the two of you hid in the woods like runaway lovers. James didn't answer immediately. 1 second, then 2. Finally, he exhaled. I never thought it would last this long. It started as a few weeks. Then it became months. Every time I brought up going back, she'd beg, she'd cry. I loved her. I gave in. Rios took out his phone and played footage from the gas station security camera. Sherry, barefoot and disoriented, in tattered clothes. And then one day she left you, returned on her own? Reyes nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. I woke up and found a note. I'm sorry. I can't take this anymore. I need to be forgiven. She left, taking with her the last reason I'd been hiding for 4 years. Delgado stood up, eyes steely. Then it's time you face the consequences. You didn't just help her deceive the police. You helped trigger a public outcry where hundreds of people, including her husband and 2 kids, lived in hell for 4 years. Reyes bowed his head. A single tear dropped onto the back of his hand. Silent. There were no more excuses, no legal escape from the love that had dragged them both into darkness. Interrogation Room 1, the next day. The room was oppressively silent. A single yellow light cast shadows across the table, softly illuminating Sherry Papini's gaunt face. Arms crossed, she leaned back in her chair, eyes wary like a small animal cornered and alert. Rios began, voice even and cold. Sherry, we found James Reyes's DNA on your clothes the day you returned. You never mentioned him in your statements. Can you explain why? Sherry blinked. 1 second, 2. Then she pressed her lips together and gently shook her head. I don't know that man. I'm not sure how his DNA got there. Maybe it was a mistake in the lab. Delgado raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He opened a folder and flipped to the first page. We used genetic genealogy to identify the DNA. It initially matched someone from the Reyes family, and we traced the lineage backward. That's how we found James. Later, from trash collected outside his home, we obtained a second sample. Rios placed the forensic report beside her, tapping a line highlighted in bold. 100% match. DNA sample A, victim's clothing, X DNA sample B, James Reyes. Sherry frowned, but her lips still held a fragile, composed smile. Maybe he did something to my clothes without me knowing. I don't remember seeing James again, not since I got married. Delgado leaned back, pulling out a handwritten letter, a copy of a page scribbled on old paper. Handwriting matches samples from letters you've written to your husband. This was the note you left James before leaving the cabin. Sherry squinted, breathing sharply. I never wrote that. He could have forged it. Rio stared at her, then pressed a button. A recorded voice echoed through the speaker. James Reyes. I didn't force her. She came to me, willingly. She wrote that letter. I still have it, because I always knew the day would come when she'd leave me behind. Sherry flinched. She swallowed hard, still trying to salvage the narrative. People can edit audio. I still don't understand why I'm being accused. I'm the victim. Delgado slammed his hand on the table, a sharp crack echoing through the room. There were no signs of forced entry, no real binding marks, no witnesses, no tire tracks. No one dragged you blindfolded across 2 states in broad daylight. The only DNA we found was yours and your ex-boyfriend's, whom you lived with for 4 years. Sherry lowered her head. A tear dropped onto her dress, but her voice had lost its earlier softness. "I didn't mean to deceive anyone. I couldn't live like that anymore. I felt like a ghost inside my own life." Delgado: "You staged a fake kidnapping that shocked the entire country. You didn't just leave. You wanted people to believe you were tortured, brutalized, and escaped death. Why?" Sherry was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, as if confessing to herself, "Because if I simply left, I'd be a terrible mother, a coward, an ungrateful wife. But if I was kidnapped, at least I'd still be a victim, still worthy of love." Rios tapped the table softly, voice as hard as steel. "You didn't just betray trust. You turned an entire community's fear into the backdrop for your lie. Did you really think no one would find out?" Sherry looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I didn't think at all. Back then I just wanted to disappear." Delgado exhaled. He stood, folder in hand. "Well, now it's time you show up, in front of the law." The door opened. 2 officers stepped in. Sherry didn't resist. She stood, raising her wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut, a clean, final sound, like an alarm ringing for a long-drawn tragedy, finally reaching its end. Behind the one-way mirror, Keith Papini stood silently. In his hand was a family photo taken that autumn, the season everything began to unravel without him knowing. He watched as Sherry was led away, and he felt no rage, no pain, only a heavy, nameless void settling deep inside him. Early morning, at the Shasta County District Attorney's office, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy as Detective Rios and Lieutenant Delgado escorted Sherry Papini, her hair oily, eyes sunken and bruised, down a long hallway. She was led into a small conference room where a wooden table was already laid out with thick folders and stacks of documents from insurance agencies and victim support funds. "Mrs. Papini," Prosecutor Harris began as he sat across from her, voice cold but formal, "you are being charged with 3 counts, making false statements to federal agents, mail fraud, and theft of government property. The total damages you've caused amount to over $300,000. Sherry fell silent, her hands limp in her lap, her eyes blankly staring at the floor. Harris didn't let the moment pass. He continued, "Our investigation shows you received funds from at least 5 victim aid sources, including the City Fund, Federal Crime Victim Compensation, and emergency relief programs, during the time you falsely claimed to have been kidnapped." Sherry exhaled faintly. I thought I was running away. I just needed something to start over." Delgado cut in, voice hard-edged. "You once said you used the money to pay off debt, buy plane tickets for your kids. But your transaction history shows luxury hotel stays, designer shopping, and spending on your personal credit card." Harris placed a series of financial statements on the table. "These are credit card and wire transfer records, $120,000 from an insurance claim, and another $190,000 from victim relief programs, all directly deposited into accounts in your name." Sherry lifted her head slightly, voice trembling with emotion. I didn't know what else to do. I was afraid if I didn't have money I'd lose my kids. I'd lose everything." Harris furrowed his brow, tone somber. "Do you understand how much taxpayers spent to rescue you? People stood in lines to donate. Volunteers searched the woods for 22 straight days. Helicopters, K-9 units, patrols mobilized for a narrative you fabricated." Rios flipped open a file and pointed to the interview transcripts. "Even the volunteers who spent days calling your name, who hiked until exhaustion or injury, were deceived. They believed in your story." Delgado added, "We also found receipts showing you accepted emergency food aid, rice rations, even children's supplies, all meant for real victims. Sherry bowed her head, and one final tear slipped down her cheek. Her voice cracked. I truly am sorry. I just wanted salvation. A way out. Harris closed the case file with finality. What's lost can't be recovered, but justice must be served. We're recommending the maximum penalty under law, 5 years per count for mail fraud and theft of government property, plus full restitution of the misappropriated funds. Sherry shuddered, her shoulders trembling. I accept the sentence. By late afternoon at the preliminary hearing, Sherry Papini's crimes were made public. Media headlines exploded. Online commentary erupted. Police officers, volunteers, and both families sat in silent disbelief. Trust betrayed, efforts wasted, and a woman once at the center of nationwide sympathy now stood in the defendant's box, facing the real cost of her deception. In the fading light of day, as court recessed awaiting judgment, Sherry stood between officers and attorneys, red-eyed, gazing through the window. She whispered to herself, I shut the door on my freedom with my own actions. Now I have to live with the consequences. Forever. Monday morning in September, the Shasta County courtroom was more crowded than usual. Footsteps echoed softly on the cold tiled floor, mixed with the sound of rustling files and murmurs from the gallery. Police officers, volunteers who had once searched for Sherry, and members of the press. All eyes were fixed on the stand where Sherry Papini was stepping up, weary but still carrying the pride that had hidden her dark side for so many years. Judge Collins struck the gavel, his voice low and firm. This is the sentencing hearing for Mrs. Sherry Papini, convicted of making false statements, mail fraud, and theft of government property. Prosecutor Harris, you may proceed. Attorney Harris stood, his voice hoarse. Your Honor, Mrs. Papini caused a total loss exceeding $309,000, including search expenses, insurance claims, and victim relief funds. Her actions were not just criminal violations, but a betrayal of public trust. We recommend a minimum sentence of 18 months in prison and full restitution of the amount defrauded. From the audience, a middle-aged volunteer interrupted, voice choked. Your Honor, I searched the woods for 22 days looking for her. Now to know it was a hoax, I feel deceived. Harris nodded slightly and replied, We deeply respect the efforts of you and others. That is precisely why we are recommending a strong sentence as a deterrent. Defense Attorney Martinez stood next, struggling to hide her tension. Your Honor, Mrs. Papini has admitted her wrongdoing and expressed deep remorse. She has no prior convictions, and her self-harm stemmed from mental distress. We respectfully ask the court to consider leniency so she may have a chance to redeem herself, care for her 2 young children, and reintegrate into society. Judge Collins furrowed his brow and looked up at Martinez. Ms. Martinez, the court has taken Mrs. Papini's mental condition into account, but the law does not bend for personal circumstances. The court is ready to issue its sentence. He struck the gavel a second time and declared, After due consideration, the court sentences the defendant, Sherry Papini, to 18 months in prison. Upon completion of the sentence, she will serve 3 years of supervised release. During this period, she is barred from any contact with charitable or victim relief funds and must repay $309,902 to the agencies defrauded. The courtroom doors opened slightly, and whispers filled the air as Sherry trembled, standing upright, gently clutching her thin jacket. She stammered, I accept the sentence. I sincerely apologize to everyone and will do my best to make amends. Immediately, a reporter raised a microphone. Ms. Papini, what do you have to say to those who were misled and searched for you for 22 days? Sherry took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I am truly remorseful. I will never forget their efforts and am ready to pay the price for my actions. A member of the Papini family nodded through teary eyes, whispering to the person beside them, "At least she's owning up to it." Out in the hallway, reporters swarmed Keith Papini, her ex-husband. They bombarded him with questions. "What do you think of the sentence? What's your message for your children? How does it feel seeing your former wife go to prison?" Keith shook his head, dark circles under his eyes. "I just want my two kids to know that no matter what happens, they always have their father and family beside them. As for Sherry, she has to be accountable for her actions." The reporters buzzed again, recorders whirring as they pressed on. "So, do you forgive her?" Keith lowered his head slightly, then looked up with a husky voice. "Whether I forgive her depends on the path she chooses from here. Right now, I'm focused on the kids' future." Later that evening, as streetlights shone through the jail window, Sherry sat on the narrow cot, hands clasped in front of her. She whispered to the corrections officer, "Please, let me call my children, just once." The officer nodded. "The phone will ring at 5 p.m. Be ready." Sherry closed her eyes, fingers brushing the worn silver ring on her hand, and thought to herself, 18 months, 3 years of supervision, $309,902. All of it is written into my identity now. I will pay my debt and learn to live with responsibility. Outside, the street was quiet. A transfer vehicle slowly pulled away, carrying Sherry Papini, once the face of a national outpouring of sympathy, now a sobering lesson in truth, trust, and justice. Sherry had received just punishment for her actions, but the wounds left on Keith and his two children were profound. The kids had exhibited unusual behaviors ever since their mother's disappearance 4 years ago. Her brief return, only to vanish again, had left Daniel and Rachel in a constant state of fear and defiance toward every word spoken by an adult. The pale morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of the therapy office, casting scattered light patches on the wall. The Papini children, 8-year-old Daniel and 6-year-old Rachel, sat slightly turned away at the end of the table, eyes glued to a clumsy teddy bear handed to them by the psychologist. "So, Daniel, how do you feel about telling me that story?" Dr. Liam asked gently, lowering her voice and holding up an old lighter symbolizing humility. Daniel pressed his lips together, clutching the teddy tightly. I still wake up at night thinking Mom's calling me. I'm scared she won't come back." Rachel turned to her brother, her eyes glistening. "Me too. I dreamed she said, 'No one loves you.'" The psychologist nodded slowly, her voice calm. "That fear is a natural reaction. You've both experienced great trauma, but I and your dad, Keith, will help you feel safe again." Outside the hallway, Keith Papini stepped out, his phone flashing red with notifications. The screen showed dozens of messages from reporters. "Do you have any comment about rumors you conspired with your wife? Were you really reluctant about the divorce?" Keith sighed and opened an email with a clickbait subject. "Single dad or secret accomplice?" He swallowed the bitterness and quickly dialed a number. "Hi, Ms. Land. Could you give me the details for today's parent meeting?" That evening, at Rachel's ballet class, only a few parents were in attendance. As the teacher stepped onto the small stage, Keith gently lifted Rachel onto the front row seat. Suddenly, a strange woman raised her hand. "Mr. Papini, I heard you shared the profit with your wife to scam the community. Are you really a victim?" Keith lowered his head, his voice firm yet warm. "I had no idea about Sherry's plan. I only learned the truth when she confessed. I'm here to support my daughter's performance, not to defend myself." The woman shrugged and turned away. Keith hugged Rachel tightly and whispered, "You okay, sweetheart?" Rachel nodded slightly, still wide-eyed. "I'm okay, Daddy." The therapy sessions continued for months. Daniel learned to use a feeling box. a small container filled with colored paper slips where he could write down emotions whenever he felt afraid or sad. One day, he handed the psychologist a deep red slip. "I'm angry at Mom for leaving me." The psychologist explained gently, "Anger is an important feeling. You're not wrong. I'll help you move from anger to understanding and acceptance." Rachel would often lie on the therapy couch, drawing pictures of her family: Dad, her brother, herself, and a blank space in the back. When the teacher asked, "Where is Mommy in your drawing?" Rachel sighed softly. "I don't know. I just remember she wasn't there." During those weeks, Keith juggled parenting and facing the media. He gave one interview, firmly rejecting the rumors. "I was a victim of my wife's deception. I never gained anything. I just want to protect my children and stand for the truth." One newspaper ran the headline, "Keith Papini, devoted father or co-conspirator." He knew he couldn't stop the public chatter, but he chose to remain silent and focus on his children. Their lives had changed forever. Mornings were spent driving the kids to school, afternoons to therapy, evenings tidying up homework and preparing dinner. Every step Keith took was secretly photographed. Every word his children spoke could be quoted, but in return, he saw them slowly begin to open up. Daniel started journaling, writing about "the day I wasn't scared" when a helicopter flew by. Rachel laughed out loud when she mastered a new ballet move. Sherry Papini's story had become a textbook example of false victims. Social justice conferences referenced the case. She deceived the police, her family, the public, undermining faith in real victims, one speaker concluded. The press analyzed immeasurable damage, hundreds of thousands of dollars, 22 days of searching, thousands of volunteer hours, and fractured public trust. One TV program called out, "We must protect real victims and prevent imposters from hijacking compassion." Late at night, when the kids had fallen asleep, Keith sat curled up in the dark living room, staring at the blank wall. He held his muted phone, then looked up at an old family photo. Sherry, the kids, and himself at a picnic. He sighed quietly. "Our lives have changed forever, but no matter what, I'm still here. I won't let anyone take our happiness away." And in the silence of the room, the clock ticked steadily. A gentle reminder that the path to healing had only just begun after a devastation that could never fully be undone. A few weeks later, the visitation room at the Shasta County Correctional Facility was weighed down by a heavy silence. A sliver of weak light filtered through the dividing glass, casting pale streaks across Sherry Papini's gaunt face as she entered. On the other side of the glass, Keith Papini sat upright, his hand resting lightly on a large legal-sized document. He took a deep breath, then tapped the glass 3 times. Sherry flinched, her hands gripping the metal frame, her voice hoarse. "Keith, you came to visit?" Keith looked into her eyes, trying to keep his composure, and spoke gently. I have something to say. There's no need to hide it anymore." He placed the document on the table within her reach. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, surprised by the thick texture of the paper. "This? What is this?" Keith lowered his gaze, pain flickering in his eyes. "It's the divorce papers, Sherry. I signed and filed them this morning." Sherry froze, confusion spreading across her face. Her voice cracked. Divorce? Why?" Keith swallowed hard, looking her in the eye. "You staged your kidnapping, deceived the entire community, and took over $300,000 from insurance and victim support funds. I can't let you continue to be a mental threat to the kids." Sherry shuddered slightly, her voice choked. I'm sorry. I was wrong." Keith closed his eyes and gripped the armrest. "I know you regret it, but our family is already broken. I can't trust you anymore. I'm asking for full custody." Sherry nodded slowly, eyes brimming with tears. Our, our children. Keith's gaze softened slightly as he looked through the glass. I'll take care of them. I'll shield them from scrutiny. I'll give them a peaceful life. Sherry wiped her tears, her voice barely a whisper. I understand. I only hope they'll be happy. He gave a small nod and turned toward the door. Take care of yourself, Sherry. Live well, for yourself and for them. Keith left, leaving Sherry with the divorce papers and the remnants of a broken family. Outside the visitation room, the two children waited for their father, eyes wide as they were told their mother wouldn't be coming back. Between the cold prison walls, Sherry Papini clutched the papers, wondering if the pieces of her life could ever be put back together, or if only endless loneliness remained behind the steel door. Less than a week later, the divorce papers were filed in county court. Keith received confirmation on a gloomy autumn afternoon as golden oak leaves littered the schoolyard path on his way home. He took a deep breath, staring at the letter in his hands, eyes distant as he recalled mornings when Sherry zipped jackets for the kids, or afternoons when the whole family strolled through the park. The next morning, Keith rented a small apartment in the suburbs where the trees were denser, the houses spaced farther apart, and the streetlights glowed through the dusk. He packed with the kids, speaking gently to ease their sense of loss. The boy sighed. Dad, I miss Mom. Keith leaned down, brushing his son's hair. I know, but I believe here you'll both be safer. Things will get better. That evening, once the kids were asleep, Keith turned on the living room lamp and sat at his desk, opening his laptop to write an email to the school about the transfer. He typed, Dear Administration, I am Keith Papini, parent of Daniel and Rachel Papini. Due to family circumstances, we are requesting a transfer for both children to Maplewood Elementary, located at... He paused, staring at the old family photo on the glass shelf. Sherry smiling brightly, the kids playing at her feet. His chest tightened. The next day, Keith and the kids walked into the new schoolyard. The classroom door was open, and classmates ran up to greet them. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Rachel. The teachers kindly ushered the children inside, while Keith stood in the hallway nodding at the principal. Thank you for your help. I'll handle the remaining fees right away. The principal smiled softly. We're happy to support you. They'll be okay here. By midday, as the sun slanted low, Keith received a call from Sherry's sister. Keith, I think Sherry's really broken now, but the court hasn't ruled on visitation rights yet. I worry the kids might grow up with guilt. Keith gripped the phone tightly. Thank you for understanding. I'm doing everything I can to protect them. Visitation, that's for the court to decide. Late that day, Keith returned to the new apartment. The kids had finished their homework and sat quietly at the table. He brought out plates of food, his voice gentle. Come eat. I made something special for you both. Rachel looked up. You made veggie spaghetti, boo, my favorite. Keith smiled warmly. Your signature dish. Eat up, then we'll tackle that math homework. In the kitchen, the warmth of the stove pushed back some of the chill from recent days. But as Keith placed the last swirl of noodles on the plate, his eyes drifted toward the window, where leaves rustled in the breeze. He hadn't forgotten the joyful memories, but reality demanded he close the door on both the joy and pain of the past. Sherry pushed open the heavy iron gate of the correctional facility, stepping down the rough concrete steps into a bleak morning. Only a few reporters stood scattered along the edge of the yard, camera gear slung loosely over their shoulders, eyes gleaming more with curiosity than compassion. There were no applause, no family waiting, only cold lenses trained on a woman with greasy hair and a worn-out face after 18 months of isolation. Sherry walked briskly across the painted boundary line, the small suitcase clacking in her hand. She glanced at the barbed wire fence, then dropped her eyes to the ground. A reporter stepped forward, voice rushed. Ms. Papini, do you have any apology to offer the public? Sherry paused, shook her head gently, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking to herself. I have nothing left to say. She turned and walked quickly toward the green taxi waiting at the gate. Just before the door slammed shut, Sherry looked back. Her red-rimmed eyes swept over the faces watching, some cameras, some disappointed stares, and then disappeared behind the closing door. In the silence that followed, only the hum of the engine faded into the distance, as if sealing the final chapter of a tragedy that had taken everything she once had. A few days later, the temporary apartment she had rented online stood in a neighborhood far from the city center. Sherry set her suitcase down by the door and quietly arranged a few scattered belongings, a second-hand vanity table, an old photo of her 2 children hugging in the woods, a journal marked with the date she confessed her crimes. The doorbell did not ring. No one knocked, because no one wanted to greet her anymore. A neighbor peered through their blinds as she stepped out to collect a package, then quickly shut the door again. Sherry shivered. "They're afraid of me," she murmured, leaning back against the wooden door. By afternoon, when her phone screen remained dark, no calls from Keith, no texts from her children, Sherry touched the screen with a trembling finger. No one's calling. She quietly deleted all the contacts from her phone, then turned and stepped out into the street. The small cafe at the corner, once her and Keith's favorite spot, now refused to serve her. The owner simply said, "Sorry, we're not serving today." Public outrage had cooled, but the memory of the fake kidnapping remained. Online, survivor support groups continued to share her story as a cautionary tale. One article concluded, "Sherry Papini, once a victim, now a betrayer, leaving behind doubt and damage among those who once searched for her." Late at night, Sherry sat by the window, watching the city glitter with distant lights. That city now felt unreachable, not in distance, but in trust and human connection. In the silence, she exhaled deeply. "I've lost everything. No family, no friends, only loneliness. Forever, like a scar." The story of Sherry Papini closes here, leaving behind a wound in the community that once united to find the missing woman. And that wound serves as a reminder. Once trust is shattered, it is painfully difficult to mend, and the ultimate consequence may be a lifetime buried in darkness. At last, after all the storms and suffering, justice was fairly served. The innocent were vindicated, and the deceiver paid the rightful price. The Papini family, though scarred by immeasurable loss, held fast to the belief in a brighter tomorrow. Keith Papini began the difficult path of single fatherhood, but love and responsibility helped him and his children rediscover hope, slowly healing the deep wounds within their souls. The story of Sherry Papini is not just a warning about the dangers of fabricated drama, it is also a testament to the power of truth. When we confront the truth, no matter how bitter or brutal, we can still find a path toward peace. Only the courage to admit one's mistakes can open the door to reconciliation, granting both the offender and the wounded a chance to move forward on the journey of rediscovering themselves. In the community, from the tense days spent searching for the missing woman to the ordinary life that followed the upheaval, faith in justice and humanity grew stronger than ever. Acts of kindness and hands extended to support real victims gave wings to hope in the face of adversity. Even though darkness once loomed, the light of righteousness and compassion ultimately prevailed. Let us hold on to faith, never abandon hope, for justice will always shine through, and it is honesty and the courage to face the truth that lead us to true peace and reconciliation.